My name is Naitik and my roll number is 2510999065, and this is my task 6.2C for SIT202. So basically in this task we had to create a DNS server and a client architecture socket programming using Python, and we have used PyCharm software for the same as an IDE. And basically in this task it is an extension for the 5.2C task in which we had created the pseudo code for the same program. So in this we had to code it in Python and run it. So basically this was the pseudocode that is submitted in the prior task, and according to it we have created two files. The first is the server.py Python file, and the other is the client Python file, which we'll use to run and send query requests according to which the server will respond. So this task is based upon the transport layer protocol of UDP, as we know that DNS works on UDP. So for the same, according to task submission, we also had to handle the exceptions for host name and alias name records, which is A record and C name records. So we have added that also. So okay, we start the program with importing the important libraries. So we'll require the socket library in Python for creating this. This is the server code. So first of all, we had written import socket. So this will import the socket library whose methods which we'll be using further in the code. Next, we have created a dictionary which is named as DNS records. So as we know that the server of DNS server records the name for various host names of websites, and according to it, it also records the IP address for the same host names. So this we have created is the DNS underscore records dictionary. So in this, first of all, we have bifurcated it in two parts. The first is the host name records and the other is the alias name records. So I've taken two websites as the record here. We can take n number of websites here as per the DNS server requires. So first of all, I have taken www.github.com. So to this, I have created a subdictionary whose type is A, means this is the host name A type, and its value is 140.82.114.4. This is the IP address of this website. Next website I've taken is leadcode.com and set its type to A, and its value is the IP address of leadcode.com. Now we also need to cater the alias names for these host names. So the alias for github.com is github.com, excluding the www. So the alias record is github.com, whose type is CNAME. CNAME here refers to the alias name. So github.com, the type is CNAME, and the value is set to the actual host name of the website, which we also defined above. So in the alias name, the value is set to the host name, and the host name is further divided to the IP address. And same for leadcode.com. This is the CNAME for leadcode.com, and the type is again CNAME, and the value here again refers to the host name, which is the main name which we have to refer while looking at the DNS server, which further redirects to the IP address of the site. So this was the basic DNS record, and the next we look up is the server setup. So first of all, we all require the IP address for the server. So as we know that this is the device which I'm using for running both the server and client. So both of them uses the same IP address, as we know, right? Because the IP address of my device remains the same. The same computer is acting as the server and same is acting as the client. So here I have set the server IP as localhost. So it automatically takes up the IP address of my PC and sets it up as the localhost. Then we know that every request is sent via a port number. So we have taken the port number of server as 9998. This could be taken up to any values in the given range, but they are generally busy with some websites or some other places where they are running. So for the same, I have taken this port number, which is basically free. I searched it up on the internet. The next, we also require the client port number, the port number on which the client will send the query request and on which the server will send the response. So I've taken it as 1024. Again, the value of the client port could also be altered. So first of all, we'll create the socket for the server device. As we know that socket acts as the base for the communication between two devices. So first we created a variable as server underscore socket, and here we have used this socket keyword. So as we imported the library of socket, we can use its methods. So I wrote socket dot socket. So this will again define the type of socket and the type of transport protocol we are using. So here socket.af in it is a parameter. This means that we are using IPv4. if I wrote af.init6, this meant that we would be using IPv6 type of IP addressing, but here we are using IPv4, so I have written af.init. The other parameter we have used here is socket.sock_dgram. This basically defines that we're using the UDP protocol. If we didn't mention this, then by default socket.socket takes up TCP protocol. But since we are using DNS and DNS works on UDP, we have to define it using sock_dgram. Next, as we have defined the server_socket, we can now bind the server IP and server port. So the IP of the server was defined here and the port number of the server was defined here. Now we need to bind both of these so we can use it to connect to the client. So here we are using another method .bind. So the server_socket bind what? The server IP and server port. Note that here we have used brackets to pass on the server IP and server port, because the .bind function takes up the input as a single object, so we need to pass it in parentheses. So this acts as a single object, which is the server IP and the server port. Here we have a simple print statement that the server is now listening at the given port number which we have set here. So this is basically indication that the server is now ready to take up the query request from the client. Now there can be various clients which are trying to connect to the server. So we want the server to always be in the need for taking up query request. It should always be active. So for making a thing work again and again without stopping, we use a loop. So for the same, here we have taken a while loop and set it to true. So basically it will run infinite times until the user or the server automatically shuts it down. So we have taken a while loop and set it to true, so it will run infinite number of times. And here we have taken the another method from the socket. So we had defined server_socket. So here is the other method, which is .receive from. So this is another method in the socket library which we had imported. So the .receive from will take up the client port and take up the query message from the client. So here we have passed the client's port number. So this is passed on to the server.socket. And we know that this method .receive from returns two things. The first is the client's query and the second is the client's IP address. So here we have taken on the left hand side two variables. First is the client_query and another is the client_address. So as soon as we call this function, it will give us two values in return. So the first will be the client's query and the other will be the address. Query is the host name the client wants to know the IP address of, and the client address is the IP address of the client. Next, we have defined another variable as hostname. So hostname is equal to client's query. So client's query, let's say the client asks for github.com. So the client's query .decode.step. So as you know that when the client sends the request, it sends in the form of a decode format, in the form of an encoded format. So the server side needs to decode it first. So here we have used few methods .decode.step. So these will decode the bytes into data and will pass it on to the variable hostname. So the variable hostname now has the name which the client passed, whose IP it wants to know. We have printed here that we have received the query for the hostname. So the client knows that yes, the request has been accepted by the DNS server. Next, we have also defined a variable as response. So this will be used to further store the value of the response the server will send of the IP. Right now we have set it to null so that we don't have any confusions later on. Now comes the main part. So first of all, we have started an if-else statement. So inside the while loop only, first of all, if the host name exists in the DNS records. So here was the dictionary of DNS records. So first of all, we wrote if the host name is in DNS records. So let's say the client said www.github.com. The host name's request was this. So it will check it in DNS records. If the website, let's say this, exists in DNS records, then the further things will execute. Else it will send a response to the client that no record was found for the given hostname, as this DNS server doesn't have any records for the asked query for the website. So let's say the hostname exists in DNS records, so it will move inside. And now there is another variable as record. So in this record, we have passed on the DNS records dictionary with the given hostname. So now this record consists of the value of the DNS hostname which was asked for. So now we have moved to the other statement. So here we are bifurcating it in two parts. If the code is for A record or the query is for CNAME. So if the records type is A, which means if this was asked by the client and as we know its type is A, we'll simply set the response to the IP address and pass it back. So we have set the response, in this case we have set the response to the record value and we have passed it back. Else if the record type is CNAME, so let's say the client asked for this address, so it is a CNAME. So in that case we have also declared another variable as alias, and in this alias we have set the value of record. Now the value of github.com is the host name. So now we have basically again set up to the zero loop. Again we have got host name for this. Now we'll do the same thing as we did above for the A type. Now we'll take another variable as if else in DNS records and set the IP to the DNS records alias dot value. So now the alias dot value is again the IP address. So via the CNAME we got the IP address for the alias name. And now again we set the response to the alias is host name, and what we get return is the IP address, and we print it here. And at last when the communication is done, we do server.socket, the socket of the server dot send to, we send the response which we stored, we encode it and send it to the client address or the client's IP address. And this has been encoded as we need encrypted communication between the server and the client. So this is encoded and this client side will again decode it and read the message. So this was the server side of the code. Now if you look at the client side, we have similar structure. We import the socket library. Here we have the server's IP address, which is again the local host. As I said, the IP address will remain same. So again, the server port is defined as 9998 as we also defined it here. The next is the client port. So the client port is 1024 as we talked about in the server device as well. Now herein we have defined the client socket just like we did the server socket. So in the same way we do socket.socket AF init, which is IPv4, socket.socket dgram, which defines UDP. Then we write the client is now started at port this. Now the client is enabled for sending up query request to the server. Now here again we require a loop, as one client may have to ask for various IP addresses of various websites one on one. So we again put it inside a loop so that we can have a recursive field of whatever we want to ask. Here we have the host name variable, and in this we are taking input from the user. So me as a user can put up the input of the host name or the alias name we want to look whose IP for. Now as soon as we have got the host name, we have to pass it to the server. So for this we use the method in socket as to send. So this client underscore socket dot send to is used, and herein we pass the host name, and note that we also use the format of lower. So let's say me as a user sends the request for www.github.com in all caps lock. Now this isn't wrong as well. So what this line of code does is it will automatically put it to lowercase so that there is no syntax error while asking for the IP address. Next we encode the information so that the server can decode it, and we pass it to the server IP at server port, again passed on as a single object. Now we are waiting at the client side for the response. So we are using the function as dot receive from what at what the client port which we had defined above, and again this dot receive from returns two things. First of all, it will return the response from the server side, and second it will also return the address, the IP address of the server side. So again we declare two variables and equate it to the function. So the function will return two values and they will get stored inside these variables. Next we print that the DNS response is, and in the next line we have decoded the DNS response. So in the terminal we'll see that the DNS response was this, which is basically the IP which the server had sent to us. Lastly, we have a small line of code for fun. So let's say we want to check for another website. So since this is in a loop, it will ask for an option to continue using DNS. So you can send another request to the same server on the same connection, and basically it will break if you say no. So at last the client.socket is set to close as soon as the communication is done. So let's just run it and check. So first of all, we'll take the server and run it. So you can see that the server is now listening at port number 9998. Now we'll take the client side of the code and we'll run the client. And here you can see the client is asking for a host name or alias name. So as we are talking about these two websites in the DNS records, we could take in more also. So let's say I want for www.github.com. So we press enter. Now the server has sent the DNS response, and the response is IP address of www.github.com is this IP address, which you can also check was the same as we saw in the DNS records. Now since we also put it in a loop, so it is asking again if you want to ask for more websites. So let's try this. So now let's try with an alias name. Let's say I want for leadcode.com. So I'll simply just type leadcode.com, press enter, and now the DNS response, as you can see here, is that the host name for alias. So first of all, it will pass on the host name. So let's say I wrote the alias name. So the DNS server is also telling that what the host name was. So it is telling the host name for alias name leadcode.com was www.leadcode.com, and its IP address is this, which again you can see here is the same as we said in the DNS records. So now we can just simply, it's again asking if you want to continue using DNS, we'll do no, and the process was finished. So this was all about the task 6.2c. Thank you.